I mean, it's incredible, Dr. Tarpley of history and also an economist, that you broke all this down. Now it's all evident there. What does this signify? And there's also some mainstream articles today that the Arab Spring is not going completely well for the globalist.
Precisely. The basic idea is that you had all of these countries, be it Libya, be it Saudi Arabia, Pakistan, and others, lots and lots of countries in the empire that were trying to get out from under this suffocating U.S., British, IMF domination. And in order to do that, they were playing the Russian card, the China card, the Iranian card, or trying to build themselves up.
The BRICS card.
BRICS is not quite going to do it because it's a little bit heterogeneous. But yes, something like that. Individually, the BRICS, although the BRICS as an entity is not really coherent. But specifically now, the news is this. Saudi Arabia, of course, is a huge target of this. Ultimately, you might say Saudi Arabia is the main target after Egypt.
They had to get Egypt out of the way to go into Libya to bring the weapons in. You said months ago Mubarak wasn't playing ball on that. Then Saudi Arabia, then Iran. It's the whole deal.
Right. Now, here's what we've got, is an attempt by the Saudis to defend themselves, to maintain their national independence, and to stop this tremendous CIA intervention and National Endowment for Democracy intervention into their internal affairs. At the end of March, we have Prince Bandar, the head of the National Security Council, and as far as I can see, the dominant personality of the whole regime of the royal family, going to Pakistan and meeting with the Prime Minister of Pakistan, Gilani, but I'm sure also with the Pakistani army and the ISI. And the Washington Post has had a couple of freak-out articles about this, one by Martin Indyk, the former U.S. ambassador to Israel. This is a guy who, remember, is an Australian, nationalized here, very, very strange guy. The idea is that Prince Bandar has arranged that if the U.S. starts a color revolution inside the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, the Pakistanis will send a division or more of troops to put it down. There is a tradition for this. In the 1970s, 1980s, at various times, the Saudis kept a division of Pakistani troops inside Saudi Arabia for security, to put down any eventual rebellions. And those were the people, I think, that went into the holy places during the Hajj in 1978-79, when there were some violent incidents there. But you can see the idea that Bandar is turning to an alliance with Pakistan in order to defend Saudi Arabia against the U.S. is a kind of strategic revolution. Up to now, Saudi Arabia has relied on the United States for security, but now the people around Bandar see, obviously, that Obama is the main threat, that the U.S. regime, the CIA, the NED, are the main threat to the internal security of Saudi Arabia, so they're looking for an option. Now, once you say Pakistan, of course, you're also saying nuclear weapons. You can say in a certain way, it's quite possible that Bandar has arranged that Saudi Arabia is now under the Pakistani nuclear umbrella. This is quite a new thing in world affairs. These are two countries, Pakistan and Saudi Arabia, who have been under the U.S. yoke, totally dominated by the U.S., bombed in the case of Pakistan, who are trying to make a jailbreak.
And because of globalist treachery, they were fully under the Anglo-American system, but because of the attempted overthrows and assassinations of Benazir Bhutto and others, and I've had the former head of Pakistani intelligence on confirming this, Hamid Gul, folks, doesn't get any more high-powered out of Pakistan. He concurs with what Dr. Tarpley is saying. They now know they've been double-crossed. The Saudis, and again, you said this last year. I'm blown away, Tarpley, by your foresight. They now admit they're being double-crossed. Same thing 6 months ago said by our oil company connections through Lindsey Williams. And so the globalists were attempting, through the Rand Corporation Brzezinski model, for a global destabilization from North Africa, Middle East, into Central Asia as a pretext to move giant forces in to then menace China and Russia. I mean, this is an incredibly bold move.
Actually, the first attempt of Bandar, the first thing that at least I learned about, was in July of 2009. I was on your program to call attention to the fact that Bandar was playing the Russian card. He had made numerous visits to Russia. He had been meeting with Putin. They were talking about Russian military assistance also there for Saudi Arabia. So that goes back almost 2 years, and in reality more, most likely. Since then, there was a period of about a year when Bandar disappeared from view, and we weren't exactly sure what had happened to him. But now the word in various publications is Bandar is back, and I have to remind people, you may still have the idea that Bandar is this guy who's basically a slave of George Bush the Younger, Bandar Bush, close friend of the Bush family. This is ultimately all irrelevant.
He's a survivor, and now it's even in Reuters that the Saudis are saying they're being double-crossed. So he leaves house arrest. He's now back.
Right, and the house arrest, we have to see whether that was really house arrest or not. But the idea now is that if the U.S. starts this color revolution, that there will be Pakistani assistance. Now, you look at how the U.S. is attacking Saudi Arabia. One way is through Yemen. That entire thing in Yemen is basically a sideshow. The target of everything that happens in Yemen is Saudi Arabia. If you have the split up of Yemen, above all, the emergence of Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula, AQAP, led by Shiri, a Guantanamo 6-year alumnus brought in by the United States to run it, and of course our dear friend Al-Laki, the CIA lackey, born in New Mexico, shipped over, obvious double agent. Those two guys, one from Guantanamo and one from the intelligence community, are running Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula. So that's one source of a huge destabilization for Saudi Arabia.
And now that's even admitted in the LA Times and Washington Post. They're not even denying this brazenly. They think we're so done. They say bombs are humanitarian, ground troops are humanitarian. Al-Qaeda is bad when we say, good when we say, simultaneously. I mean, do you think they can really sell this to people?
Well, they're trying hard. I just wanted to mention the other angle is Bahrain. Now, Bahrain is this island, right? It's one of these little emirates along what amounts to the coast of Saudi Arabia, the Gulf Coast, the Persian Gulf, Arabian Gulf coast of Saudi Arabia. Now, there we have the Saudi troops have intervened in support of the Sunni royal family against the Shiite protesters. This is obviously intended it's not really a destabilization of Bahrain because the Fifth Fleet base is there. There is an angle of putting pressure on the royal family because they don't want the base to be used for a war with Iran.
But Webster, I want to be clear. It's a soft underbelly. I want to be clear, and it's spread the contagion to Saudi Arabia. I can't stand the corrupt Saudis put in by British intel 100-plus years ago. I can't stand Gaddafi. The point is, why are the globalists moving against their allies, their old enemies? They now admit, it's all over the news, that they are destabilizing, and the Saudis respond by saying, we're going to slash oil production, and yes, we're 2 days after they met with Gates and tried to make a deal, the Secretary of Defense, they did run to Russia and China. And so this could be a big miscalculation by the Anglo-American globalist.
It could. The idea, I think, is that these countries are targeted not because of their internal regimes. And, of course, the Saudi internal regime is quite distasteful, to put it mildly. But the main issue is that they're attempting to rebel against Anglo-American domination. I think globalism is not exactly the right term. This is U.S.-British imperialism. That's all that ever was. Globalism implies that there's a place at the table for Russia or China and so forth, and there's not. Those countries are all targeted. They're all ultimately on the receiving end of color revolutions.
Well, Webster, we're going to skip this network break, so stations should carry this, and I don't want to get fighting going on here, but I really respect your foresight and your understanding. But it's admitted now, again, we read 3 mainstream news articles yesterday, LA Times, you name it, admitting that, okay, the West did orchestrate this in Egypt, in Libya, in Syria, the State Department admits. I mean, they're doing all of this. And then I get Lennon LaRouge on for the first time ever, and I think he's got a lot of interesting ideas, and is right about the Anglo-American system, and almost 90 years old, and a very distinguished person. But when I brought it up to him that this was all a Western destabilization program, at the time it was admitted it was, he basically said it was a real revolution. Now, I understand that people have real reasons to be upset, and the globalists recognize that climate politically and then triggered it, but it's not debatable that they've triggered it, and off air you were mentioning that to me. Do you have any statements about it?
Well, certainly, the thing that LaRouche was saying was that this was all genuine and spontaneous, and I think that is absolutely wrong. The grievances are real. The potential was real just as the potential under Metternich in Europe in 1848 was real. But the detonation and then the shaping, the leadership, the program, and the general direction of these things is totally provided by the CIA, MI6, and NED. I found it was interesting when you asked LaRouche that. He immediately dodged the question. He said, the only thing I can say about it is it's all totally spontaneous, and in 1782, the King of France made a mistake. Now, the 1782 King of France made the mistake actually leads to an argument that the French Revolution was actually a destabilization of France, provoked and promoted by the British.
But it was. Let me stop you. This has all been declassified by the British. If you read mainline history, you're a doctorate of it. But the general public doesn't know that. It's on record that the South had real grievances. They had them two decades before, or 2.5 decades earlier with Andrew Jackson. They had real tariff issues. The slavery, was never an issue. That's just a modern fiction. But the British were in there openly manipulating the South and then stationing troops in Canada, threatening to invade. That's all mainline history. This is the grand stratagem, great game.
Right, and I was actually talking about the French Revolution, not so much the American Civil War, but it
no, I know, but I mentioned the French, and then I shifted gears into the yeah.
Yes, and of course the Confederate States of America was a project that was detonated and promoted by Lord Palmerston, Lord John Russell, British intelligence, and so forth. The other thing I think is interesting, looking at Bandar in particular, we have this interesting article by Martin Indyk in the Washington Post, where he basically threatens the Saudis. He says the Saudi system is very fragile, and you better remember that, Saudis. You better remember that, Bandar. We're gonna come and get you. Support for this, in a certain way, comes from unexpected quarters. Jeff Steinberg, that you recently had on your program, has been following Bandar for 2 years. Back in July of 2009, when Bandar was playing the Russian card and beginning this attempt to free Saudi Arabia from total U.S. domination, this is precisely the moment that Steinberg chose to attack Bandar for various issues about scandals and 9/11 and so forth. Really, those pretexts meaning not very much, but mainly the idea attack Bandar. And now, precisely at the time when Bandar is preparing his trip to Pakistan, which really means an opening to China, we have Steinberg again attacking him in the pages of that magazine on, in this case, it's an article that says the two worst guys in the Middle East are Bandar and Gaddafi. Now, isn't that interesting? This coincides precisely with the two main people that the U.S. and the British are concerned about in the region. So that's a very, very interesting pattern that we have there. But the general idea, I think, is clear. If Bandar goes to Pakistan, this is a little bit like Nixon going to China, right? The way you go to China is sometimes through Pakistan. That's how Nixon did it 40 years ago. Maybe that's how Bandar is doing it in a certain sense. Once you're in an alliance with Pakistan, you're also then connected to Pakistan's ally, China. And I would assume that Bandar has kept up his connections to Putin and to Russia. Now, this gives us Russia, Saudi Arabia, Pakistan, and China. Now, that's a coherent alliance. That's a step beyond the Shanghai Cooperation Organization and certainly way beyond the BRICS. The BRICS that have just been meeting, that's an interesting group. But in terms of strategy, you've got the fact that India, sitting right in the middle, is essentially an ally of the U.S. against China. So they may agree economically, but strategically, I don't see how they will. If we have Russia, Saudi Arabia, Pakistan, and China, that could become something that would be strategic and military, but it could also become monetary and economic. That is an alliance with real world-shaping potential. And again, it's much stronger than these sort of things that we've seen so far.
Now, we are seeing press reports admitting that the West is involved in all this, but that it's not going well. How do you see this ending right now?
Well, let me just, one other scenario is this guy Michael Scheuer from the CIA. Of course, CIA veteran, was the Bin Laden desk. I've always called him the head of the Bin Laden fan club in Langley. He's on television saying that if the Saudis crack down in Bahrain and start killing Shiites, then the Iranians will invade Bahrain and essentially be at war with Saudi Arabia, and therefore the U.S. will have to intervene against Iran.
That's the Brzezinski dream of the kamikaze event, playing them off against each other.
Right, but you see what he's doing. He's speaking very bluntly, but the whole idea of this is to scare Saudi Arabia back onto the plantation, right, back onto the U.S. Imperial ship. The thing in Libya that you've been mentioning, the news this morning is that British, French, and Italian advisors are going to be present on the ground in Libya with this al-Qaeda infantry, right?
But they've always been there. Now they're beefing the force up.
Right. Precisely. But now they're going to be there openly. They've been there for 6 or 7 weeks since probably the middle of February and even earlier. So this looks like mission creep. Very interesting anniversary. We just had the 50th anniversary of the Bay of Pigs, and it's exactly parallel, except that when Allen Dulles and his crackpots of the CIA invaded Cuba in April of 1961, when the first phase failed, when the irregular forces failed to get an insurrection in Cuba, Kennedy was then asked by Allen Dulles, we need air support, we need actual invasion with Marines. And Kennedy said to him, no, I'm not giving you the air support, I'm not giving you the Marines, and by the way, you're fired. That was a real president.
Well, it came out even on Frontline, that they fired him. He fired that whole group when they brought him northwards and said, let's stage terror attacks and blame it on Cuba to invade.
Right, a number of causes, but certainly within a year after the Bay of Pigs, Allen Dulles was out on his ear. Tremendous hatred in the CIA for Kennedy ever since. But what happens now? In this case, Libya's same example. You've got a secret army, in this case staffed by al-Qaeda terrorists, that you've released from Guantanamo, and they failed to overwhelm Gaddafi. So now we have the second phase. What you never saw in the Bay of Pigs, you're seeing now. You're seeing the mission creep that happens when you don't have a real president, and the CIA comes back and says, look, our secret army's not working. We need boots on the ground. We need airstrikes. We need all this stuff. And Obama's going to give them.
And they're
all
saying
those things.
if as these troops try to march in with humanitarian weapons, if Gaddafi resists in any way, then there'll be an open invasion with the Marines waiting off the coast. How do you expect that to end? I mean, they're openly saying, Gaddafi, leave now, or we're coming into Tripoli.
Well, that would be another war, and we've seen the Libyans have real guns with real bullets. You had Somalia, seemed like a very easy invasion.
He's also armed over 1 million of the citizens.
Yeah, that's actually very interesting. That's the Lin Piao People's War Doctrine, and the interesting thing is you can't do that unless you are really popular. If you don't have a base, now it's largely a tribal base, but it's also a base based on economic performance. Remember, Libya was the poorest country in Africa, now it's the richest, and that happened under Gaddafi. So that's quite a record. It's not all bad.
Yeah.
There's also this great man-made river, right? The biggest.
No, definitely they want to destabilize. Webster, from the halls of Montezuma to the shores of Tripoli, will fight our country's battles for the bankers. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
We'll talk to you again very, very soon. I mean, it's incredible, Dr. Tarpley of history and also an economist, that you broke all this down. Now it's all